Alrighty, y'all. Got egg on. Taking a look at Ask an Australian. Asking all the Australians all the questions. How will they answer? Well, that's the fun part. Let's get into it. First up, what is something that Australians are still generally ashamed of but shouldn't be? Let's take a look at some of the answers. Breakdancing. It's time for a period of national healing and togetherness. And I'm pretty sure most of you watching will get what this is referencing. It was fun while it lasted. It was something that rocked the world and the internet, but definitely one of those memes that could get a little bit annoying over time. So yeah, definitely heal, unite over it, and move on. Don't be afraid to dance or break dance, because that famous performance has came and went, and most likely will not be replicated. Aussie TV and movies. We make some amazing TV shows. Mr. In Between, Rosehaven, Optics, Fisk, Deadlock, The Newsreader, Aussie Taskmaster are just some recent ones. I have to look into some of those. And movies, too many to name. Have seen people on here shit on them, but then turn around and get their co-outs hard over the most mediocre MCU or Star Wars slop. I don't agree that MCU and Star Wars stuff is total slop, but it's definitely a very, narrow type of movie, right? Or a genre of movie. I will agree that Aussie TV and movies, I would say a lot of the world probably doesn't know of, and they're missing out. I don't even know of much, but I've had the pleasure of learning about probably more than maybe the average American in my awesome community. So, the stuff I have discovered has been really, really good. Just like anywhere. I mean, some good, some not so good, but that's literally anywhere. Like, there's some really cool and funny, so funny and so clever stuff, in my opinion, coming out of Australia over the years, over the decades. And a little less related, but still somewhat related, not really movies or TV shows. I still stand by the fact that motorsports and then the actual motorsport coverage itself, top tier coming out of Australia. And that goes for past and present. Even you look at motorsport broadcasts from the 80s and the 90s coming out of Australia, and it looks like it's 15 years ahead of where it should have been. Like, you look at a video from 1993, it looks like it's like you're looking at something from 2007. I'm not even kidding. Australian motorsports coverage, especially around Bathurst and stuff, really freaking good. I could safely say way ahead of the U.S. motorsports coverage, in that exact year, if you're referencing like an older year. Accent while singing. I think attitudes are changing, but when I was growing up, they'd make sure you'd soften and refine your pronunciation to the point you'd sound British, American, or neutral, such as for church choir. A lot of people weren't aware of it and had really strong opinions about singers like Missy Higgins sounding like a bogan. This is so true, and one reason I like Missy Higgins, especially when I lived overseas and her music felt way more at home. I'll have to listen to that. Wow, that was really good. I feel like I've probably heard her and not known it, like not known who it was. Let's see. One of the most beautiful songs ever written. Smallville, One Tree Hill, Pretty Little Liars, Grey's Anatomy. Wow, she's been in a lot of shows, her music. So I probably have heard it for sure, watching TV over the years. One of the most underrated artists ever. Very interesting. I will say, and I'm not well versed in this because I'm not Australian, but like she sounded sort of Australian, but it wasn't that crazy. Like, she didn't sound like a bogan. Or maybe this is saying they didn't want her to sound like a bogan. I might be reading this wrong, but yeah, she's really good. That was cool. I love discovering new things, and especially when you're learning about it, and it's like, oh, that's Australian. Like, I didn't know that. That's really cool. All right, moving on to the next question. What news story in Australia shocked you the most? And the answers do not disappoint. Misplacing the prime minister in the sea and then naming a swimming pool after him. Only in Australia. Bondi Shopping Mall, that and Lynn's Cafe made me definitely have a new anxiety step every time I go out in public. This one's really sad and relatable. This stuff happens in the USA, not here. And that kind of made me realize it absolutely could happen here. It could happen anywhere, and that's the scary part. I wish that wasn't part of humanity. I wish that wasn't part of our world. It absolutely frickin' sucks. So as it turns out, most of these are pretty much referencing the same set of like events, like that, violent events. But there's not that many, thank goodness. Although any is too many, in my opinion. But honestly, I think that kind of speaks to, at least from my perspective, even though it's kind of a grim one, that there hasn't been that many crazy stuff compared to here that has happened in Australia. That's why a lot of these keep coming up. Port Arthur, other things. I was hoping this would be maybe a little more fun, like news stories. But that's okay. We'll move on to the next thread because these are pretty much all politic things, like when so-and-so moved out of office and so-and-so was in. And then, like I said, the unfortunate violent news stories. Now, on the flip side, what non-issue do you think is talked about too much in Australia? Can't wait to see the answers on this. Ray gun coming up again. Agreed. Like, it was funny. It was a meme, and it definitely had maybe, a few months shelf life. It would be fair, considering how wild it was. But yeah, that's ran its course, and hopefully, if that's still showing up on media, that's kind of like, wow, they can't come up with something better than that. What are they in media for? The Sydney versus Melbourne rivalry. No one apart from the media gives a shit. So yeah, I think that's probably, I don't know, because I don't live there. I want to speak for people, but judging from little rivalries between cities and sports and stuff here in the U.S., I'm sure this is like playful. It's not really a big deal, and it's not on people's minds every day. And it's just more of like a very, very faint surface level thing that really doesn't mean much. I'm sure many people just enjoy both cities, and I'm probably glad to have both cities as part of Australia, and they each have something to offer. This one I wholeheartedly agree with. People's sexual identity. My motto, if it's not your groin or your partner's, then keep out of it. I think that's a very healthy point of view. I don't know why that seems to be on, at least in our news cycle here in the U.S., seems still like every other day there's something about this company or this movie or this celebrity or this whatever, narratives and things that always work their way into the weirdest subjects and news cycles. And it's tired. It's very tired. Everyone's tired of it, I think. At least most people are. Culture wars. Who gives a f? We should be more interested and invested in a class war. The rich get richer. The poor get poorer. I found a grocery list from when I first moved to Perth. Came to $67. Decided to buy all the same things again where I could, near to when I couldn't. $134. Bullshit. You know what? I couldn't agree more. Big time. People get riled up about sometimes it seems like the funniest things, or quite frankly, the wrong things. When there's a lot of problems that a lot of us in America, in Australia, probably in many other places are dealing with, and a lot of normal people notice. We should be kind of worried about this, right? The rich are getting really rich in the past 5-10 years, especially in the past 5 years. And the gap between, the rich, the middle, and the poor, so-and-so, well, it seems like the middle's down here now, right? So, like, we're all down here. That's kind of what it feels like. I hate to say that, but the rich are just, like, so rich now, and everyone else is getting left behind, and it's really frustrating. I go to the same thing I say all the time. If you go from, like, 1980 to, like, 2010, the difference in price of stuff is going to be, X amount, but it's not going to be, we're talking 30 years or 35 years, whatever metric you want to use. You understand that things are going to be more expensive over time. Okay, yes, I get that. Again, when you're using big amounts of years to compare that, it makes sense. He says down here just before 2020, basically, right? So let's say 2019. 2019 to now, that's only 5 years, 6 years, right? How are things double in price? Over double in price, like groceries. That's disgusting, right? If things were double in price every 5 years, that would mean in 1980 things were $0. That doesn't even make sense. Of course, things don't double price in something as small as 5 years, but that's what's happened. It seems like in the last 5 years, and at least here in the U.S., in our case, wages have not gone up barely at all. So. Now, this one's pretty funny. What were the biggest culture shock you experienced within Australia? The Australians weigh in when I realized that young people and or Americans would use the term SMH, which means shaking my head, And I realized they weren't talking about a newspaper. So now I'm lost reading this. Like, what? And the response, so funny. I always see Sydney Morning Herald first and then have to correct myself. Now I get it. That is pretty silly. Things like that, when they don't translate across countries at first, there are some really funny examples of that. And as an American, where I usually see this kind of stuff kind of spawn, and then seeing how other people learn it and respond to it seems more fascinating than it should be. How much of a morning place it is, how everyone's up doing stuff super early. I go back to the UK and cannot find coffee before 9 a.m., and it frustrates the hell out of me. Conversely, though, everything shuts earlier. Now, that's pretty interesting. I actually like that. I've had different phases in my life where I'm, stay up late, wake up late, and then, go to bed earlier and wake up really early. And I prefer the waking up early part. I love mornings. I love seeing the sunrise. I love morning kind of fresh, chilly air. And I will say, even within the U.S., just in my experience, it seems to be like warmer places tend to be like the early type. So here in Illinois, of course, it's only hot for a couple months a year. Otherwise, it's relatively mild and or cold a lot of the year. And of course, it depends. But I think a lot of things are generally just not super early. Lunchtime places, and then they're open kind of late. Whereas when I lived somewhere hot, so when I lived in like southern New Mexico, West Texas area, it's very hot there a lot of the year, for more of the year than up here. And places were open super early to kind of beat the heat. And everyone woke up early, too. A lot of people do sleep in up here, up north. And then conversely, things closed really early. So in New Mexico, places were closed at like 8 p.m., 9 p.m. You couldn't do anything after 9. It's like they rolled up the sidewalks and the whole town was shut down. Whereas around the Chicago area, dude, there are 24-hour places everywhere. There's places that are open till, 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning. It's like a totally different culture because I kind of associate Australia with being a little more exotic, a little more like warmer weather as a whole. I know there's cold places. I know there's places that get snow. But I'm saying like as a whole, Australia, remember whenever I bring up the weather map, Australia as a whole sometimes is really warm. A lot warmer than a lot of other places. And so I kind of imagine that people would want to get up early there and start their day early. I mean, it's beautiful. The weather's great. It's warm. You want to get up. You don't want to sleep in and miss out on like a sunny day. If you have places that are wet and cloudy and cold, that's when you want to sleep in. I think it's related to that. Maybe I'm wrong. You can tell me your theories down below. But this guy sums it up pretty good. Brit here. And my shocks were amazing and cheap coffee, abundant everywhere. The sun is aggressive as Most Aussies have very mild or neutral accents. Wildlife is abundant in urban areas. The huge $5 million houses next door to a run-down crack shack. The amount of eateries and cafes in the suburbs. In UK, our suburbs are mostly residential houses, and you go to the city for eating. Work culture is great. My employers always looked out for me, offered me jobs, encouraged me to come back after I left. I returned to the same employer 3 times. That one's really cool. That's something that's ruined here in the U.S. Our work culture is pretty bad with a lot of companies. So that's cool to hear that that's alive and well in Australia. And then, of course, everything else definitely checks out from what I've heard. All right, next up, this one might be kind of interesting. Little trigger warning. What is your unpopular opinion about Australia? Remember, these are not mine. This is polling the internet. Let's see. I think these are mostly Australians, actually, considering it's called Ask an Australian. We are extremely uptight and sensitive and conformist. There's a big effort to pretend the opposite. I'm just kind of going to read these and let you guys weigh in on this. You would know more than I. Australians like to think we're descended from convicts and rebels. Don't forget we're also descended from their jailers. Yep, Australians are quite conservative and obedient socially, but they like to pretend they are larrikins. France, India, Spain, and other countries are far more rebellious. You have to let me know if you agree with this. I mean, I don't really have a foot in this. This might have some truth to it, although, is it true for all Australians? Hell no. Another unpopular opinion, Australia is not very important on the global stage in many areas, especially business. As an Aussie who has worked in massive global businesses from the UK, I quickly saw that Australia is usually not considered significant or promising enough to risk much investment and resources or given much voice in business decisions. While I think Oz business is actually seen as being innovative and forward-thinking, that's the vibe I've gotten. A lot of impressive stuff I've always heard, companies, inventions, all these different things coming out of Australia. That's definitely present. Generally, decision makers see us as too small and far away to warrant much thought. I think that's part of it. I don't think it's for like really bad reasons. I think it's more just logistical. Like Australia seems so far away and not small. It's a big country, but maybe population wise, it is a lot smaller than a lot of giants when it comes to population, like the US, the UK, Germany, France, China, whoever, right? So that's just kind of the math, right? That's not a good or bad thing. It's just, it kind of is what it is. When I worked big corporate, Australia was seen as a small market that was expensive to operate in. Consumers that have money to spend to be very picky. Most vendors are comfortable enough that they generally won't work too hard to satisfy a new customer, which meant a lot of new stuff wasn't available and was significantly more expensive than bringing it in yourself. Some U.S. firms found Australia to be a great testing ground, though. They figure if they could almost break even with extra wide product or service, it was certain to be profitable elsewhere. That kind of seems like that's plausible because Australia does seem, for a foreign company, like tough ground to break in. And if you're able to have just somewhat success in Australia, then you'll probably have a lot more success in some other markets. So that one, I don't know if you agree with that. I feel like that one I kind of do agree with. Just having some success is success. Going to Australia as a foreign company and just thriving, that doesn't seem like it happens very much. And final unpopular opinion, the birds are pretty loud. I mean, it would be fun because for me, again, it's different. But maybe if you had a lot of crazy birds in your backyard, you hear them on a daily, it might get old. It kind of just depends on how you view it and who you are. Now, this one should be interesting. I love the United States. I love Australia. They're similar in some ways, but of course a lot different in a lot of other ways. One of the weirdest things and probably worst things I think we can both agree on is Americanization of somewhere else. As an American, I would say, don't copy us. We're not a good, our country has been rough for a couple decades. And what are some recent examples of Americanization of Australia? Hopefully not many, because there's not a lot that would be great to adopt from us. Liberal senator walking past the media today in Parliament House and calling them fake news multiple times. Gee, I wonder where he got that from. This one is huge. I wouldn't want anyone to copy this. Automatic tips on EFT machines. So what that means, credit card readers, stuff like that. When you go to check out, I've seen this on Australian posts. Of course, we see it here in the U.S. too. It'll show you like a tipping option, and it might even default to, a 15 or 20% tip, and you have to make sure you look and hit no tip, right? Point is, it adds a lot of, one, sometimes two steps to a transaction, so it wastes time and it adds up, and it might trick people into tipping when they shouldn't. From what I understand, you guys don't have a huge tipping culture in Australia, and I'm sure you want to keep it that way. We do have a huge tipping culture in the U.S., and I don't really like it, but I have to say tipping was always in like these very defined genres, like these defined scenarios where, okay, you tip for this, other things you don't, right? The tipping thing has gone crazy, though, in the last 5-6 years. All these point of sale EFT machines at places where you would have never tipped even in the U.S. your whole life are now having tipping options, and it's really awkward because why is that there, right? And you constantly have to read this and make sure you hit no tip. And of course, it gets awkward sometimes after the people are right there and you keep hitting no tip. But then again, they shouldn't expect tips because it's not even an industry where you would have had that. And to see that in Australia just sounds absolutely wild. A lot of cafes I go to either skip the question for you or apologize for the screen. At least they're pretty reasonable. That makes it less awkward. That's pretty nice. Pretty sure any tips just go straight to the owners and not the staff. That's the problem I have with them. Tips are shady, because there's a lot of what ifs and a lot of, let's get real, probably not sharing, at least here in the U.S. Why would it be different anywhere else? Unlike the U.S., in Australia, if you have a culture that's not relying on tips already, why would you change that and have tips kind of work their way in? Doesn't sound like a good idea. Massive American-style pickups, F-150, Tundra, Ram. Tips now on most POS receipts. Oh, yeah. Okay, so tips on point of sale. Okay, so we just covered that. Yeah, that one's coming up a lot. The massive American-style pickups, I'm kind of surprised. Again, if people can afford things, more power to them. But these massive American-style pickups here in the U.S. used to be cheap, and now they're extremely expensive. They become unaffordable here. And from what I've heard, they're much more expensive in Australia because a lot of them have to be, you know, converted to right-hand drive and further shipping and blah, blah, blah. So, like, there's all these costs, and they're extremely expensive, like 150 to 200,000 Australian dollars for these trucks. I don't know how people afford them. I mean, that's crazy, especially if you have local trucks that are more established, trucks or utes. I wonder why people go for the big American ones. That, again, sometimes people just want something specific. I get it. Sometimes people want a big lifted truck to show off, right? Clearly, there's going to be people that want that here in Australia, really anywhere. They have the money and they want a big truck, they're going to buy it. But I am surprised that there's enough of them sold in Australia where people as a whole kind of notice. That is very interesting to hear as an American. That is weird. Gender reveal events. This one's interesting. I remember, you know, maybe I don't follow trends like super closely, but I never even have heard of these until like probably 2017 or 18. I don't know really when these started in the US, but I think they started before that. I think we were kind of late to the game. But yeah, I remember hearing about these right about when my wife and I got married, which would have been 2018. But then I remember hearing on a video I did probably 6 months, 8 months ago or so. It was more geared towards Europe, but it was saying that gender reveal parties aren't really a thing in most countries over there, although you see some in the UK or something. And I was like, oh, wait, they don't really have those many other places. But apparently they might have them to a decent amount in Australia. I'm going to guess it's probably younger people, maybe around my age, you know, 20s, early 30s. And again, is this one a huge deal? I don't know, like probably not. Although some gender reveals kind of go way crazy above and beyond. And I think that can become a big deal because some of them turn into like dangerous. Some of them turn into like excessive spending where it's like, why are you doing that? And if it disturbs, you know, kind of public spaces and, you know, crowds, it's like, what are you doing? Right? At least here, some of the gender reveals have become crazy. Halloween and excessive merchandise on and other marketing holidays like Valentine's Day, Easter, and Thanksgiving in Australia? You have to let me know if this is true. I know you guys have holidays too, and you probably have somewhat of consumer stuff like, you know, decorations and stores having displays for Valentine's Day and Easter and all this stuff, maybe even Halloween. But is that really like taking over Australia? I haven't heard that personally. I'll have to let you guys weigh in on that. Thanksgiving, how would that even be a thing? Like what? Anyway, I'm going to cut it there. Those are some questions the internet has for Australia and Australian answers. We could go on with a lot of these. I probably will very soon. There's actually some I didn't get to cover here that look like they're pretty interesting. But yeah, that was fun. Of course, some of these will be extended by you guys in the comments, which I think will be equally interesting to find out as well. I hope you enjoyed this. I appreciate you watching, and I hope your day is going great. My name is Ian. You're watching IWrocker. Until next time, y'all. Catch you later.